The wicked envy and hate. It is their way of admiring. Victor Hugo. Part 1. Desire. They were beautiful. The perfect couple. Diana, with her luscious red curls and her piercing green eyes, and her slender curves that were always so perfectly accentuated by her tight jeans, and with her legs so long and sleek, the way she cuddled up so closely to the girl next door as they lied there together, flaunting their perfect love for one another as they laughed along to one show or the next. And then there was the other, the girl next door. I spent most of my days watching them be together through the small square frame of my bedroom window, its hinges glinting in the warmth of the sunlight that came streaming through the glass, the sun dipping low along the horizon behind her house. I was envious of her, the girl next door. With her beautiful golden hair, its strands glimmering in the orange sheen of that slowly fading sunset, with its voluptuous curls that cascaded over her shoulders in fine waves, and I always envied her smile, her cherry red lips curling up the side of her petite face where her deep blue eyes would shine like beautiful seas of sapphire, reflecting the joy that was her personality. And I often sigh at the thought of it, of the idea that I would be so intimidated by her appearance, feeling quite distraught by how much prettier she was than me, and the way that she would always make me feel so insecure about myself. Where her hair was golden and voluminous, mine was brown and flat, and where her eyes sparkled majestically in the sunlight, mine would only just spark. And where her luscious lips smiled so radiantly, mine were quite pale and quite plain. She was everything that I was not. She had a perfect relationship, one that I would watch carefully, wishing that my emotions could be reciprocated so easily, where my thoughts and my feelings would be respected, my presence appreciated, and every time they kissed, I wished that it was me over there with my arms wrapped around her slender curves, holding her closely to me, and gazing into my eyes with a look that made me feel safe, secure. And then our lips would touch in a gentle and affectionate kiss, one that would ease my spiraling thoughts at once, one that would send electric signals tingling up and down my spine, our passion for one another unbothered and unbroken by everything else around us. I often imagined my hands on her waist, the pads of my fingers tracing her curves with delicate caress, and I often imagined her fingers glossing over mine, so tender and gentle, inviting me into a wild world of pleasure. I had been seduced by her, my mind unapologetically infatuated by her presence. Like some sort of spell had been cast over me. The only thing that I could think about was her. Day in and day out, her very being haunted me. Her smile an ethereal painting amidst the fragile canvas of my thoughts, and her laugh was a whisper that echoed all throughout my mind, so joyous and so appreciating of the life that she was living. And every time I closed my eyes, I would see her walking in that divine, graceful manner of hers, her hips swaying fluidly, confidently from side to side, a pendulum of perfection as the tips of her favored Louboutin heels clicked proudly below her, counting away the seconds of her life in a steady rhythm. Flawless. She was perfection personified, and my simple infatuation of her only continued to grow, mutating into what can only be classified as an obsession. And I admit that I was obsessed, but how could anybody not be, though? Everybody that knew her absolutely loved her. She had a habit of turning everything that she did into a good, memorable time. Her personality was entirely infectious, her laughter a sound that could lighten any mood, but mostly I think it was the fact that she was kind. Always there to help a friend in need, always the first person to take the time to listen to another's problems, offering sound advice to help that person through their hardships. She had a big heart, nobody can ever deny her of that, and her advice was always helpful in some way or another whenever someone else's was not. She was truly beautiful, both inside and out, and so my obsession consumed me, and I wanted nothing more than to be exactly like the girl next door. But the thing I was most envious of was her relationship with her lover, Diana, the closeness that they shared together. Through my window across the lot, I had watched them closely as they talked their problems out, as if it were any other casual conversation that they had been having. Never have I witnessed an argument, and I have never seen either of them express any sort of anger or resentment onto one another. A perfect relationship, through and through. And that may sound like a fairy tale, the kind of romance that one can find in an old Jennifer Garner movie, or maybe something with Katherine Heigl. But theirs truly was the perfect relationship. And it only stirred my obsession of her all the more, bringing to life within me a strange resentment for myself. And still, I continued to watch her, my feelings for her consuming every fiber of my being, and it wasn't long at all until I hardly ate anything anymore, refusing to leave my seat there in that small square window of my bedroom for anything at all except toilet breaks. And I would often tell myself that not eating was only contributing to my desire to want to be exactly like her across the lot, the girl next door. It's the desire to get close to her, to get to know her, and it's a desire to be touched by her, a desire to be tickled by the tenderness of her fingers, and it is a desire to be seen by the piercing gaze of her sparkling eyes, a desire to be kissed by her lips, and it is a burning desire to hear her voice and to feel the whisper of her kind, soft words upon the lobes of my ears. The desire to be comforted by those words as they slipped into my subconscious while our bodies danced to the rhythm of love, our passion for one another never fading as the pale silver light of the moon wavered across us. A desire, and nothing more, for what else is there when the fires of desire rise to inflame our very existence? The girl next door had it all, and the only thing that I could do was watch as it all came so easily for her. Or so I had told myself. Part 2. Through the Curtain. I lit a cigarette later that night, inhaling deeply, the ember brightening at the end of it before my eyes, feeling the nicotine course its way throughout me, releasing an intoxicating and invigorating effect that possessed me, putting my thoughts at ease and calming the pounding within my temples. I held my breath a moment, allowing the cool rush of that nicotine to flow freely through my being, and then I released it once more, a plume of smoke coiling into the cool nightly air beyond my open window. It was quiet out, the low, dull drone of late June cicadas no longer an irritating ring within my ears, and the moon was perched in the dark sky above her house, its face full and bright with tranquil luminescence, a dreamlike haze of silver bathing the slumbering neighborhood, except for the girl next door. The majestic purple drapes of her bedroom were partially drawn this night, and through the small gap in them I could see her, lying on her bed, a lamp on the table beside her casting a dim, somber glow upon the pages of the open book in her lap. Her legs stretched out before her, her ankles crossed as her bare feet hung there at the end of the mattress. I don't know what book she'd been reading. I couldn't see it in its entirety, and I didn't really care what it had been either. It could have been any old book at all, for all that I know, and I sat there watching her read regardless. She would occasionally flip to the next page, and she would occasionally shift about, readjusting her legs and rotating from upright against the headboard to lying on her side, the book spread out on the edge of the mattress before her, and I even saw her roll her own small joint, the smoke filling the air before her to writhe about like gray tendrils that played about the lines of her perfect, pretty round face. Hours passed us by, each one of them consumed by her reading that same book, me lighting another cigarette, her shifting about on her bed to re-find comfort, turning page after page in silence, me watching it all intently, curiously. Her lover, Diana, hadn't yet returned home from work, having taken up a double shift down at the local gas station. She was a clerk, for all that I had gathered of her, but that mattered not in my watching of the girl next door. Another hour passed, within which she stirred twice in her slumber, rising once to disappear from my sight for a brief few minutes, and I was finishing another cigarette, flicking its remains down to the grass below, where I watched its red cherry burn out before returning my gaze to her window. Still she slept, and soundly so, and I sat there in silence, the drone of the cicadas returning in that silence, awakening my thoughts anew. There is a certain kind of madness, I think, in the melancholy of sitting alone that causes the mind to wander into the darkest corners of the past. Those planes of existence where the ghosts that haunt our memories roam without restraint, creeping about the shadows of long-forgotten moments in time, that exposes one's insecurities within an otherworldly light of eldritch power that calls us back to face them all over again. And compelled forth by that siren's call, our vulnerabilities end up getting burned beneath that exposing light, and the scars of the past reappear to inflict a vengeful pain upon us for having forgotten them at all. Part 3. Scars. I was 17. My mother and father never really got along with one another all that well. They were constantly screaming at one another, arguing about this or that, often resorting to violence in order to resolve their many issues. At least on the part of my mother, I mean. My poor father never stood a chance in the shadow of my mother's temper, any time at all, and her patience would be tested. And my mother wasn't a hateful woman, by any means, not so much as she was a mean and spiteful woman. And my mother's cruelty knew no bounds at all, and she would often do things as a means of getting back at my father for one thing or another. I remember my mother getting upset at him quite frequently for coming home late more times than not. She had accused my father of being out with another woman, her feet stamping across the hardwood floors as he walked in the door, her finger waggling in his face as her mouth unhinged to release a line of profanities at him. Confused, and naturally so, I imagine, my father tried to defend himself from my mother's wrath, but Mom's wrath was a wicked thing to be had, her words demeaning and belittling upon my father's pride as he was only stand there, bearing the lashes of her tongue with dignity, unmoving and unable to get a word of his own out to her. My mother drove herself insane with constantly worrying about the loyalty of my father, and I always thought that she had just been acting out her own insecurities over the entire situation. And I would defend my father on numerous occasions, believing him to be wholly innocent. Believing my mother was just being crazy about all of this, I faced my own share of wicked lashes because of my devoted loyalty to my father's proclaimed innocence. And I thought that she had gone absolutely insane when she confided in me late one night. She told me that she couldn't take it anymore, the stress of not knowing for certain whether my father was having some kind of an affair or not. She told me that she was worried about the other woman being younger than she was, prettier than she was, and she told me that she was scared that my father would end up leaving her for that younger, prettier woman, that she needed a way out of the nightmare she had found herself lost within, that of not knowing for certain. At 17, I didn't really know what to say to her that would ease her suspicions and her concerns, and so I just asked her what she wanted to do about it. She told me that she didn't know what she could do, but when she pulled the handgun from her lap and laid it on the bed beside me, I knew at once that she knew exactly what she was going to do about it. And then she told me that she wished there was an alternate way she could fix her situation, only she just couldn't see one. Unhinged by her own paranoia, my mother snatched up that handgun, its metallic casing glimmering in the soft glow of my bedside lamp, sinister and deceiving in its beauty, and she went to go and wait by the living room door for my father to return home for the night. A sudden compulsive desire to see my mother's madness come to fruition, I went and sat beside her, a comforting hand placed upon my mother's leg as we counted the seconds that remained of my father's life. When he stepped through the door, entering the house quietly in that way he always did every night, my hand was knocked aside as my mother jumped up to her feet, the gun pointed directly at my father. I was 17 when I watched my mother kill my father. Part 4. Watching. Fuck the sun, I thought, lifting my head from my arm upon the windowsill, razors of golden sunlight splicing across my face, which throbbed in sheer discomfort. As I rubbed at my cheek, a tight crick in my neck from my unnatural position of rest lancing up with a sharp pain that made me regret cracking it at all, I thought about the girl next door, remembering that she never used profanity so carefree in the way that I often would, and I retracted my initial thought I'd had upon waking just seconds ago. I knew that I would need to be much more careful as things progressed between the girl next door and myself. And that's the thing about watching, I think. One gains an unprecedented attention to details that any other would come to miss. The mortal eye is quite fascinating in that regard, and with time, just as with anything else, one can train the eyes into perceiving the most ordinary of details in any given circumstance. Just as the blind man trains his ears to see the world around them, a watcher trains their eyes to notice each and every strand of hair that falls upon one's shoulders as they walk by unsuspecting on the sidewalk below. And a watcher can teach themselves to look for anything that sticks out of place in their particular surroundings. A crack on the sidewalk, a single leaf that's just about to fall from the branch it's tethered to, a couple in a nearby window that kisses one another while their spouses have yet to return home from work or school, the overdue tag of a Prius that cruises by on the street, the gun that young Jimmy Walker tucks into the band of his pants before he boards the bus for school in the morning, an angsty teenager alone in their bedroom getting high on drugs without mom and dad's knowledge. An experienced watcher can spot everything without trying, but it's the littlest of details that will ultimately make the biggest difference in the end. And I was a complete fool for having forgotten that the girl next door never uses profanity. And she never once crossed the street without using a crosswalk, and the girl next door never cut across someone's yard without their permission to do so. And she never missed a step up or down, and the soft, elegant clicks of her heels were never once out of sync, her stride never broken and uneven, and she always wore cherry red lipstick, and her nails were always manicured, their white tips grazing along the grooves of her waist as she walked, so divine and so perfect. An experienced watcher will also notice the distinct subtleties that make up another's persona. The things that someone will do consistently over and over again, those little defining things that someone has ultimately adapted into their regular routine as part of that regular routine. Like how the girl next door will incorporate the same old pair of square-rimmed spectacles from time to time to conduct her reading, and how she always wears the same adorable pink bow whenever she decides to tie her hair back, and how she will never leave the house in anything other than heels that stand 5 inches tall, and how she always uses the same exact sparkling highlighter, a cool purple, to accentuate her lower lids and the bridge of her nose. More than common subtleties, though. An experienced watcher will come to notice the varying quirks that make up someone's personality even. Like how the girl next door absolutely despises any day that would spill forth a torrent of rain from the sky for fear of smudging her makeup or ruining her hair. And she especially hated the idea of being anywhere without her precious heels, having to substitute for a pair of lower wedges or boots. Oh, the agony of not being able to show off her sparkly toenails through the peeps of her favorite stilettos. And she would always carry her purse hooked over her right shoulder, her left hand being her more dominant one. The girl next door also despised any time the weather was cold, claiming to her lover Diana that the cold made her skin itchy and caused it to break out with horrible acne. An experienced watcher needs to have patience over anything else, forcing themselves to adapt someone's routines as their own, and they must know how to manipulate the flow of time to fit their own personal desires, and one must teach themselves to ignore the ticking of the clock because every droning second that passes is crucial. If one misses any little detail at all, then the grand game of watching has already been lost to them. I start my mornings at exactly 7 a.m., except for Sundays, because that is the exact time that the girl next door awakens to prepare for the day ahead of her. 7 a.m., she rises. She stretches, and then she uses the restroom, and at 7:30 a.m., she gets herself dressed up in the garments she laid out the night before. Blouse, skirt, or some tight jeans, her favorite pair of Louboutins, and then she slips on a necklace, a bracelet bearing her initials, a gift from Diana, her Apple Watch, and a gorgeous diamond ring that Diana gave to her last year on her birthday, May 20th. And then by 7:45 a.m., she sits in front of her vanity mirror, an elegant cabinet with a large mirror embroidered with jewels and gems that are befitting someone of royalty, and she applies her makeup with delicate, trained hands, foundation, eyeshadow, mascara, blush, cherry red lipstick, and a slight pink gloss, and always in that order. And then by 8 a.m., she is downstairs brewing a cup of coffee, always the same Colombian brand, and then she grabs her purse and the keys to her convertible Mustang that purrs to life as she drives off to attend her morning classes. And while she is gone, I wait. I watch. And as I watch, I think. The girl next door was as smart as she was pretty, and nobody could ever deny her of that either. She had been accepted into Berkeley last fall, the fierce desire to be a doctor fueling her ambitions, and instead of reading, the girl next door could be seen studying some college textbook or another instead. She got straight A's. She made the honor roll when she was in high school. She was elected prom queen 2 years in a row at 2 different schools. She moved around quite a bit before her lover Diana came along, and she was also elected student council president when she was a senior, and she had an affair with her college professor during her first semester at Berkeley. She had a pretty good future still ahead of her, there was no denying that, and she was highly optimistic about it, too. And why shouldn't she be? Her lover, Diana, offered great moral support towards her personal ambitions, often encouraging her to keep pursuing them, always there to make her feel comfortable, to make her feel empowered in her desires, which were constantly burning for success. And successful she always seemed to be. The girl next door. Where luck often evaded me, it heavily favored the girl next door. However, I often like to tell myself that she could make her own luck anytime she wanted to. And still, I wait. And as I wait, I watch. And as I watch, I think. Part 5. Scars 2. The gun went off with a hollow bang that reverberated throughout the living room, its thunderous echo startling me into a new and horrifying reality. My eyes were wide, unblinking in their disbelief, as I watched my father's body drop to the floor, his head snapping back to slam against the living room door as a 7mm parabellum round pierced his skull, bits of bone splintering out the back of his head, spraying gore and crimson all across the living room walls. And I watched his back arch inwards as he was thrown backwards from the impact, his figure crumbling beneath him as gravity brought him down immediately in a loud thump that continues to haunt my mind now, long after everything has been said and done. And I watched in sheer terror as his blood continued to ooze along the walls, large globules leaking along its beige surface, bubbling from the hole in his forehead. His eyes were still open, and I watched the light within them flicker and fade, and then I turned my head to look over at my mother beside me. And unlike myself, or even my father, my mother's eyes were narrowed, a black cloud of resentment within them, gleaming wetly through tears that fell in protest to her burning emotions, and her mouth was a hard, thin line that split her face in two, turning it into an amalgamation of pain, adrenaline, rage. Her shoulders rising and falling in slow, steady motions, a calmness working from somewhere deep within her as her mind accepted her nefarious deed without hesitation. I watched the gun still held in front of her, gray smoke writhing from within its barrel, both of her hands perfectly steady, her fingers resting quite comfortably within the sleek curve of the trigger. And I watched those tears roll down my mother's face, smearing her mascara as they did so. My mother an emotionless vessel that was quickly filling with the stark realization of what she had just done. Her plan carried out before her in a furious montage of sliding images that shifted seamlessly from one to the next. And I watched my mother completely shut down as that realization filled her being entirely, sapping the strength from her legs, knocking them out from beneath her. My mother collapsed at once, falling to her knees there on the floor in a stream of my father's blood, the gun held so steadily in her hands clattering on the wood beside her. I watched my mother bury her face into the palms of her hands, tears glistening as they slipped between her fingers, dripping to lace with the blood on the floor before her, and then I watched her sob and sob. For several minutes, I watched her nimble shoulders hitch in her sorrow, and for several minutes I felt an emptiness in the room with us, a loneliness that chilled my spine. And then I watched my mother pick up that fallen gun, its barrel still smoking, and I watched her place it into her mouth, her finger itching along the sleek curve of the trigger. Part 6. Affection. The girl next door always parked her convertible Mustang, a gorgeous cherry red, to match her lipstick, facing up the road from her house, northward, so as to make her morning commute as hassle-free as it could be, which meant that she needed to walk around the convertible's hood, or else risk breaking one of her precious heels on the storm grate near the rear of the vehicle, a lesson she had come to learn the hard way, unfortunately. And doing this puts her squarely in my field of view. My view of the girl next door was completely clear. There was a lone tree just outside my bedroom window, a young Monterey cypress that stood quite erect there on the edge between my house and hers. However, it contained low-hanging branches that have never once been an intrusion upon my many, many hours of watching her, and so I could very easily see her whenever she was outside of her house. I could quite plainly see everything, as a matter of fact, inside and outside, just as any good, experienced watcher should allow for themselves to do. Every day, from Monday through Saturday, I would watch the girl next door park her convertible at 11:30 a.m., round its freshly waxed hood, and then I would listen to the tips of her heels click so serenely along the pavement below her as she made her way to the quaint little mailbox standing erect at the end of her patio walkway. Her last name printed in bold white lettering upon its cherry red exterior, and then I would watch some more, admiring the rather proud and pious clicking of her heels as she returned to her home. And then I would watch her through the windows of that home as she sat and talked with her lover Diana, and I would watch her lips press against Diana's, their love for one another provoking my envy of her even more, the sparks of their shared romance causing embers to ignite within my being, a flame of resentment that would burn away inside for hours and hours long after the beautiful Diana had left to go work for the night, and then there she would be, alone once more, the girl next door. In all my hours of watching her, the thing that I looked forward to the most always happened at precisely 9:30 p.m. every Wednesday night. It was something that filled me with joy rather than envy, something that awakened some distant part of my mind, something that filled me with nostalgia for days long past. It was something that was quite special indeed, giving me an unrelenting desire to belong to her. Every Wednesday night at precisely 9:30 p.m., the girl next door would slip out of her jeans and she would remove her blouse, and her heels would click adoringly across her bedroom to her closet, where she would slip instead into a white silken nightgown, and then she would return to her bed, laying out upon it and answering a phone call from her lover Diana, who would be taking a break from her job to go and sit in her car, the same exact cherry red convertible Mustang belonging to the girl next door, and they would exchange seductive words with one another. And as I watched her lay there, her senses aroused by their conversation, I would begin to imagine that I was over there with her, lying on the bed beside her as I listened to her soft words, feeling them crawl into my ears to whisper sweet nothings of affection, and my desire to be hers would grow, consuming me, trapping me within a vortex of pleasure that I hadn't felt in so incredibly long. I would imagine myself holding her, touching her skin with loving fingers, and I could imagine myself there on top of her, my lips kissing up her stomach, breathing in her scent and relishing in its succulence. And then the desire would vanish, its flame extinguished as the girl next door ended their conversation, her lover Diana having to return to work, and then I would be watching her once more as she would read or study, calling it a night just before midnight. And I would once again be left alone to sulk in the ashes of my burned out desire, my envy returning at once to haunt my ambitions. But eventually that envy becomes something more. and I find myself seething in anger, rage burning hot for having been constantly denied my pleasure and my desire. That to belong to her, and for her to belong to me. Part 7. The Razor's Edge. Thursday mornings, at exactly 7 a.m., I awakened to watch the girl next door anew. She completed her daily routine, leaving for school at her usual time, and this time, as I waited for her to return, I watched her beautiful lover Diana instead. Diana's routine was also quite familiar to me, and every morning following the girl next door's absence, she would gear up for a 45-minute jog through the neighborhood, most of which had also risen and left their homes for work or school. And as Diana was out, I decided to put my plan into motion. So I crept across the lot, making certain to use the sidewalk instead of cutting through the yard, exactly in the same way the girl next door would do, and I slipped inside her home, using the spare key that Diana kept hidden away inside a false rock beside the door, one she had stowed away there in case there was ever any kind of emergency that required it. I walked across the beige carpeted living room, staying on the tips of my toes as I did so to ensure quieter, softer steps. And I wasted no time at all in going upstairs to the bedroom, its layout immediately made familiar to me from my hours and hours spent watching through the window across the lot. I knew the exact location of everything in this bedroom as if it had been my own bedroom. The small, cute little Minnie Mouse end table on the right side of the bed, the matching Minnie Mouse lamp, her tail the pull cord on top of it, where I had watched the girl next door sit and read well into the night while her lover Diana was away at work, the bookshelf where she got those books she read on the far wall of the bedroom, a three-tiered tower shelf that was lined from edge to edge with various books by various authors, most prominently of which being Stephen King, his name printed boldly along their spines, and I recognized the elaborate vanity mirror beside it, where the girl next door would sit with her back to me through the frame of my window across the lot. The surface of the mirror's cabinet packed full with various high-end brands, as was always befitting of the girl next door. Giorgio Armani, Dior, Chanel, Gucci, Valentino, Victoria Beckham, and I imagined her sitting there now before me, patting away at her perfectly petite face, foundation, eyeshadow, mascara, blush, highlighter, cherry red lipstick, and a faint pink gloss, always in that order, and then I turned away from the mirror, my gaze barreling through the window where I would often sit and watch from. And I imagined myself sitting over there now, watching myself as I stood here in her bedroom, moving the way that she would move. And I wondered what it felt like to be here, getting dressed for the day, while a pair of eyes watched me from that small square window across the lot. I wondered what it might feel like to not know that I was being studied by those watching eyes, my every move being analyzed for any flaws and inconsistencies, my watcher taking in every single detail of my life, learning who I was through those every details that they were absorbing so contently. And then I discarded the thought at once, focusing on my mission, using my internal clock to tell myself that only 15 minutes remained now before Diana would return home from her morning run to shower and get herself ready for her own day, and my presence here became compromised and my plan ruined in its entirety. My very presence here, in this place, had been a risky thing for me to do, but it was a risk that I had needed to take. By ensuring that I was now walking along the razor's edge, I knew for certain that there would be no turning back. Not now. Not when I was so incredibly close to being hers at long last. I crossed the room to the large closet where she kept her clothes, at once becoming enamored by the contents I saw within it. But there was only one thing here that procured my curiosity over any other. The pair of Louboutins the girl next door favored. A pair that she owned duplicates of, and I lifted one of them up, examining the large 7 that was printed boldly on the inside, and then I knew. Perfect, I thought, smiling a bit at this confirming realization, and then I replaced the shoe into its proper place among the others, and I made my escape, locking the door of the house behind me, and returning the spare key to the false rock beside it, and then I returned home. I returned to the small square window of my bedroom, and I watched and I waited for the girl next door, knowing for certain that my plan would be perfect in its execution. Part 8. The Girl Next Door. For 2 years, I have watched her, following her across the country to California from Long Island, New York, keeping to the shadows, keeping my distance from her, but always ensuring I remained close by, but not allowing myself to get too close. Until now, everything has been building to this. There comes a time in everyone's life, at some point or another, when we must all come to a defining decision that must be made. A split second where nothing else matters except for the fulfillment of our own personal burning desires. And for too long I have pined over her presence, starving for the affection that she has been denying me of, lusting after the delicate touch of her fingers, the feel of her lips on mine, the scent of her hair inside my nose, the feel of her words in my ears, the sweet nothings that were whispered in the throes of pleasure. For too long I have yearned to make myself known to her, to be close to her, and to lie there in the bed beside her, and I have yearned to feel her skin beneath my own, my desires fueling my urges of imagined pleasure forward. For too long I have desired to be hers, watching her from somewhere close by, my eyes carefully studying her every move, learning the way that she walks and learning the flaws of her routine so that I would make certain I understood exactly all that there is to know about her, taking in her perfect beauty and her perfect personality and her perfect fucking behavior as if it were all my own. To get close to someone like the girl next door is to first know her both inside and out, what she likes, what she doesn't like, what she adores and loves and cherishes over others, and the things that she hates and despises and avoids. But to learn these things, a watcher must set aside all indifferences, and one must have an unbroken patience, an appreciation for time as it ticks around us unending, and one must maintain their emotions no matter how extreme they may be, and one must keep the subjects of their desires close to them at all times, and we must watch over everything else. And for 2 fucking years I have done exactly that. I have guarded my emotions, the rage I feel towards her for having been denied her affection. And I have maintained my patience, biding my time for the perfect moment best befitting the girl next door. And now, that moment has finally come to me, and I must make a definitive decision. Now, I must take action, for if I do not, then I am unsure how much longer I can hold back my desires, which have burned and burned and burned deep inside of me for 2 fucking years. And it is now that I must enact my vengeance upon her, my pain, that of having been denied what is so rightfully mine for so very long. It is now that I must act out my plan. And so I claimed my perch there at that small square window for one final time, and I watched her through the window across the lot for what would be the final time, and I saw her over there, alone in bed, reading another fucking book. And so I waited and I waited and I waited, smoking cigarette after cigarette after cigarette, thinking about my life over the last 2 goddamn years, this fucking person that I have become. Watching her as she shopped so impulsively up and down the busy streets of New York City, and I have watched her flirt so effortlessly with every guy and girl that offers her a drink at some bar or another, and I have watched her waste her mind away on booze and drugs, all behind her lover's back, and I have watched her seethingly as she has shared her body with guy after guy, girl after girl, uncaring in her addiction to the wild throes of bodily pleasure, and I have watched her disloyalty taint that sacred bond of love that Diana has shared with her, and again my rage blossoms. Deep within me, beneath the blackened shell of my heart, that rage grows, its stem thick and thorny, the tips of those thorns puncturing that blackened shell, spilling thick and blackened blood as my heart has become a prisoner to that grating, piercing pain. And I feel that rage growing there still, writhing inside of my being like a thing possessed, and my head pounds beneath it. My temples throb day in and day out, filling my mind with tension that squeezes upon my thoughts, forcing them into submission, suffocating them of the happiness and the joy that once existed amongst them. And that rage has painted my vision red, its deep crimson tint obscuring the pleasures and the joys that I may have once reveled so gloriously within. My rage became everything to me, and the presence of the girl next door has become my life for 2 years, and I have come to hate her because of it. I have come to hate everything about her. Her perfection is an insult to my imperfection, and her beauty is an insult to the ugliness and the plainness that I have harbored my entire life. And yet, while I have come to hate her so, I have also come to love her. I have come to love everything about her, and my desires to know her for it all has driven me into the madness of obsession. Her walk, so elegant, the length of her legs accentuated by the dangerous height of her favorite stilettos, their tips clicking along the pavement below her as if it worshipped her, singing melodiously in praise of her, her stride graceful and ever unbroken, all of it creating a beautiful symphony of divinity. And her hair, so golden and long, with wavy curls that cascaded over her shoulders, glimmering and glistening, a holy and sacred artifact that defines her eternal beauty, and her eyes, so blue and shining in the aura of her hair like crystalline sapphire seas, and her sense of fashion, her exquisite taste for names like Louboutin, Prada, Versailles, Burberry, Dior, and Gucci, all completely encapsulating her need to be noticed and respected by those around her. And it was her kindness, so radiant in its genuineness, her heart large and opened wide for those around her, her capability to display such charitable donation upon those of lesser standing than herself, an inspiring act for one to witness. And it was her relationship with her sweet lover Diana, so perfect in its portrayal of authenticity, a display of passion and affection unmatched by the relationships of those around her. Again, my rage swells within me. For 2 fucking years, I have watched her walk so that I may teach myself to walk the same, learning the evenness of that walk and learning the grace for which she utilized so effortlessly, learning her stride, teaching myself the exact rhythm she walked with so that I may do the same. And for 2 years, I have watched her do the same routine of applying her makeup, learning her pattern as I studied her efficiency, teaching myself the exact amount of foundation she uses, and teaching myself the exact amount of eyeshadow, and teaching myself her careful technique of applying mascara, and where to apply blush, and the exact shade of cherry red lipstick and faint pink lip gloss, and I have taught myself the exact line where the cool purple highlighter goes, so that I may look exactly as she does when I do the same. And for 2 goddamn years, I have watched her voluptuous hair shimmer and shine in the afternoon sunlight, teaching myself the way those elegant curls flowed as she walked so that I may train my hair, no longer so straight and thin, to do the same after dyeing it the exact golden color that hers is. And for 2 years, I have watched her shop so carefree, learning the exact stores and styles that she favors so that I can wear the same. And I have studied the exact height and thinness of her favorite Louboutins so that I can learn the way she wears them with flawless execution. And I have learned that our sizes are the same, 7s, so that I can know I will be able to do the same. And I have watched her kindness in motion, training my mind to match hers in its genuine nature. And I have studied her interests and her dislikes and her favorites, and I have studied her daily routine so that I will know exactly what to do when I become her. But first, I must dispose of her so that I can reclaim what is rightfully mine. I care very little for the girl next door, but in becoming her, I will have my Diana back at last. Part 9. Diana. I lunged out at my mother, knocking the gun from her hands, its flash of white lighting the side of her face, the bullet grazing the lobe of her ear as the gun scattered across the floor beside her. I fell on top of her then, my eyes twinkling wetly as tears burst forth from their corners, the realization of my mother's devastation causing a deep fracture to rip through my heart. Her sorrow was a bright light within her eyes, my own still wide as I gazed into them, seeing them change into orbs of black at the pain that had poisoned her. And still I believed that my father had been innocent, and now I had to live in a world without him, and I began to resent my mother for what she had done to him. It wasn't until an investigation of his murder that my opinion of him was changed. Found on his phone was the very proof that my mother needed. Messages and phone calls and photos had been exchanged numerous times between my father and a much younger, much prettier woman named Catherine, his secretary, and so I wanted to help my mother, believing her drastic plan that night to kill him was completely justified in its overall execution. Broken by disloyalty to her and unhinged by his dishonesty, his numerous lies knife wounds upon her psyche, my mother was never the same once she pulled the trigger that split his skull. She became depressed, often desperate in her desires to mix alcohol with pills and to inhale carbon monoxide from the exhaust of her truck as she sat within it, which is where I would often find her if I needed her, and so I began to worry about her. And so I intervened before her incarceration, convincing several that my mother was really insane, and she was put under an indefinite suicide watch, locked away inside a padded room somewhere near upstate New York. And I was alone in a home that was haunted by my father's absence, and I became depressed, just as my mother had been. I had managed to hide my mother's gun before the police conducted their investigation, and I would sit for hours in my bedroom playing with it, turning it over and over in my hands, my eyes wide, entranced by its sinister metallic beauty, studying its sleek curves, and I would often contemplate turning its barrel around upon myself as the image of my father's blood splattering on the wall replayed itself over and over within my thoughts, and I would hear the echo of that gun going off beneath those images, and I became aware of the crimson arc that had erupted out the back of my father's head before it hit the wall, the way it had oozed and dribbled along the beige surface of that wall, and I became aware of the way my father's body had crumpled to the floor, his back folding inwards as his head was smacked back by the impact of the bullet piercing his forehead, how his knees were thrown out from beneath him, and I became aware of his eyes as his body lied there in a pool of crimson, wide and alert and fucking watching as my own eyes watched. And ever since then, I have been a watcher, my supreme attention to detail stemming from the trauma of that one tragic, unforgettable moment, mere seconds of time that have become frozen in my thoughts since the age of 17. I began to see that moment in my dreams, night after night, those wide, watching eyes of my dead father following me through cyclopean landscapes of infinite fantasy, and it wasn't long at all until I started to feel trapped, locked within my father's dead gaze, every motion I made being studied by that one damning gaze, and so I began to long for an escape, some way that I could break free of that dead gaze, and so I went to the roof of my mother's apartment building, and I stood there on the edge of it. The city lights, forlorn and ethereal in their luminescence upon that vast, beautiful cityscape, where cars honked in the streets far below, and where a warm light gleamed in every apartment window, and I began to cry, coming to terms with my decision to jump. I lifted one foot out over the edge, feeling my heart speed up within me, and feeling my breath hitch with my silent sobs, and I closed my eyes, seeing my father's dead gaze judging me once more, and then I held my breath and went to fall forward. A hand fell upon my shoulder just then, halting my fall, and I felt myself being twirled around, feeling a pair of warm, tender hands embrace me as they pulled me away from my predetermined fate. I opened my eyes, and that was the first time that I had met her, Diana. She had saved me from a damned salvation that night, and I owed her everything because of it. 6 months later, and Diana and I were an official couple, though we were not without our faults. Depression had followed me after that night upon the edge of the roof, casting a thick shadow over me that corrupted my ability to see reason. Often, I would get angry with Diana whenever she would force me to relive my mistakes, the tragic moments of my life before her, urging me to confront them once more in hopes of finding closure. Diana was quite persistent in her endeavors to console me, only I never really ever gave them or her all that much of a chance, just wanting to leave the past behind me and move on with my future, with Diana. And despite our emotional difficulties, our physical tendencies were absolute perfection. It was a kind of art, what I had for Diana, a beautiful dance of passion, our desires burning feverishly within each of us, consuming us well into the hours of the night, her touch so gentle and delicate upon me, and her lips so luscious and affectionate as she would kiss up my neck, and it was the way that she would nibble on the lobes of my ears, and how her words were always so soft and soothing as she breathed them into my ears. And it was the way that our bodies would sync together in our movements of lust, all of it culminating in an elegant frenzy, wild in our consumption of one another and enchanting in our carnal desires to bathe in one another's passion. A painting that was absolutely priceless in our bargain of love. What Diana and I had was beautiful indeed, and I loved her quite dearly, and she loved me just as so. But where our passion shined unending, our emotional stability had fractured. A crack that ripped, jagged and sharp along the seam of our love as I became more and more closed off to her, distant in my inability to confront the seething demons of my past. And I eventually shut myself off to Diana, my distance pushing her into the arms of another, the girl next door, who she had met some time before my incident on the roof of my mother's apartment building, the two of them becoming fast, close friends, and eventually the infectious beauty and kindness of the girl next door had possessed my sweet Diana, just as it had possessed me in my time of watching her. And the girl next door had stolen my sweet Diana away from me, and I hated her, the girl next door. Her beauty so far beyond compared to my own, and her kindness so refreshing in the aftermath of my toxicity. And I hated the girl next door for the pain she had caused upon my sweet Diana and her disloyalty to her trust. And I hated the girl next door for the manipulation she instilled upon Diana and her passion of her, choosing instead to pleasure countless others when Diana wasn't around. And just as my mother believed with my father, I saw no other way to cope with the girl next door and the uncertainty she portrayed upon my sweet, precious Diana. And so I started to watch her, my envy blooming at the realization of her beauty, that which had distracted Diana from my own, wanting to become the girl next door so that I could be beautiful. And I envied her perfection for having convinced my Diana that something was wrong with me. And I wanted to become the girl next door so that I could be perfect. The only thing mattering to me being the perception Diana had upon the girl next door. For if I could be her, then Diana could love me in the way that she did the girl next door. And so for 2 fucking years I watched her, biding my time in secret as I taught myself to be exactly like the girl next door. And now Diana will love me once again, and what has been wrong for so very long will be put right at last. Part 10. In the Shadow of My Mother. It is a fickle thing, this thing called madness. An all-consuming sensation that twists a person's thoughts inside out, bending them and breaking them, contorting them into gruesome amalgamations of reasoning and logic. But is it madness for one to know that they are mad? Is it madness when one's envy for another corrupts them into a knowing sense of obsession? Chaos, too, is a vulnerable entity for one to cross, but is it really chaos when one restores order upon it? Order and chaos, obsession and madness, all of them are two sides of the same coin. So how does one know which is which? When that thin line between right and wrong becomes blurred, how does one tell the difference anymore at all? What is right can become so very wrong, just as what is wrong can be made right once again. The rage swelled within me as I watched the girl next door sit out in her bed, another book opened in her lap. And as I watched, I thought of the way her and my Diana shared their passion for one another, becoming envious of her all over again. Stolen away from me, it fueled the fires of my rage to know that it wasn't me over there lying beside Diana in that way that I had so many times before. And so I rose from my perch in that small square window of my bedroom. I crossed the floor of my bedroom to the trunk I kept stored away beneath my bed. Stooping low before it, I opened the trunk and withdrew the gun I kept within it, its familiar metallic sheen smiling in the dim glow of the fluorescent light above my bed, sinister and glinting at me in that similar way it had before, when I would sit and turn it over and over in my hands as I contemplated turning its barrel upon myself. As I had it in my hands, the pads of my fingers tracing those elegant curves, I saw the gaze of my dead father flash in my subconscious, Everything from that one tragic moment returning to me at once, crashing over me like a tsunami that flooded my mind with absolute control. I rose from the trunk, my mother's parabellum resting in my hand down at my side, steady and calm despite my fiery rage, and I walked across the lot to enter the house of the girl next door. As I entered her bedroom, her eyes lifting from her book, the novel Misery by Stephen King, a twisted story of obsession which made me smile with delicious irony, only for those beautiful blue eyes of hers to widen in fright at my sudden emergence before her. And with my mother's gun pointed out at her before me, I imagined my mother standing there beside me, her eyes black with sorrow as they watched me pull the trigger. I knew at once as I watched the girl next door's blood arc along her bedroom walls, staining her peach-colored sheets a deep crimson, her body sliding over the edge of her bed to thump upon the floor before me, that I had so involuntarily fallen into the shadow of my mother, allowing it to possess me in my insatiable need to become the girl next door. I have since disposed of her corpse, slipping into one of her nightgowns and applying her makeup in that same way that she did. Foundation, eyeshadow, blush, mascara, her favorite cherry red lipstick, and a faint pink gloss. And I have since mastered her walk, her favorite pair of Louboutins strapped around my ankles. And I have since lied out in the bed the way that she did. And I have since been reading as I wait patiently for my Diana to return home, to return to me. Okay guys, Samantha Rose here, and I hope you have enjoyed this story. This is one of the darker stories that I have written, kind of in line with The Perfect Date, which was another dark story that I wrote, and I don't really know where this idea came from. I was just sitting here, and I've had this idea in my head for a while now, and all that I had was a title, The Girl Next Door. And as I began to write it, it ended up turning into this compulsive, obsessive piece of fiction that you have just heard now. And I'm quite proud of the way that this one turned out, especially there at the end. And I hope you guys have enjoyed. And I will see you guys next time, okay? Until then, stay safe. And if you like this story, why not give me a like and maybe subscribe to the channel so that you can get more stories like this. I write stories like this all the time, and I don't know, I have fun doing it, and I hope that it is reciprocated by your guys' enjoyment, if that makes any sense. Anyways, see you guys next time, okay?